Welcome to the channel, guys. My name is Jess. So the entire risk asset market, including Bitcoin, saw a massive recovery on Thursday morning when Trump announced a 90-day pause on tariffs for most countries except for China. Bitcoin rose above 83,000, and this happened just as the crypto markets were on the edge of a pretty bearish cliff. Naturally, there are some big questions now about the short time frame trajectory of Bitcoin and how the short time frame recovery has reflected on the high time frame charts. Let's dive into the video today to talk about the recent price action, the news, and what it all means for the future of Bitcoin. Before we dive in, make sure you guys smash that like button and subscribe to the channel to get regular Bitcoin analysis every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. And sign up to my free Telegram for more regular Bitcoin updates. If you're a trader and you're interested in my VIP channel, be sure to message me down below on Telegram. VIP gives you exclusive access to my personal trading setups with exact entry points, targets, and stop losses. Alrighty, guys, so jumping into the charts, let's talk about the recent news and the recent price action before we dive into our analysis. So we can see here that Bitcoin has had quite the recovery over the last couple of days. We had a double bottom sort of formation happening here at 74.5 thousand, and following that 90-day pause tariff news that Trump released on Thursday morning or / Wednesday night for those of us in Australia, we saw a push above this downtrend, or our short time frame downtrend here for Bitcoin, the one that took us all the way from 88,000 down to 74.5, and we went up to rally to the prior high in that downtrend, this level of resistance here at 83.5. So that is unfortunately where we saw the local top there for Bitcoin, and we can see we've had quite a rejection since then. We fell back below our horizontal range here on the short time frame, and we can see the loss, or that inability to establish 81k, the base of this range, as support, right? Flipping support, resistance to support. Failure to do that sort of led to the aggressive part of this move downwards, back down to 78,000, and Bitcoin is now currently sitting around 79.5. So let's talk about the news that came out that sort of triggered all of this. There really isn't all that much we need to know, but essentially over the last couple of months, there's been a rising trade war as Trump starts to, or has started to consistently increase tariffs for a bunch of trade partners in the US, a bunch of countries, and over 60 countries, including China. And the tariff pause is going to take effect for pretty much every country except for China, who retaliated the most in regards to the tariffs, or the hikes for the tariffs. And so theirs has increased to 125%. But yeah, so that was some of the news, and of course that was sort of bullish because as we were approaching a trade war, that's of course not good for the US economy, and S&P 500 dropped a lot as a result of that news, and of course the macroeconomic sort of scenario that we're in right now with the indecisiveness of the rate cuts, and how we weren't really moving towards the Fed's inflation target, and how the tariffs are also having an unforeseen impact on inflation as well. But so S&P 500 has seen a pretty big recovery. We saw a really green day on Thursday, 14%, with the weekly close probably not going to be as intense, but still a very, very green day for S&P 500. Probably one of the most green days I've seen for quite a while as well. Now, on top of the tariff news, just yesterday we had inflation data come out. Now, inflation was bullish for risk assets and quite scary for the economy. We had month-on-month inflation actually come out negative. So the average prices of goods and services this month in comparison to last month is actually lower. And that's a warning sign because, one of the only reasons that happens is because there isn't enough purchasing power with this much inflation, or the costs of, we're really seeing the effects of like the cost of living crisis, where the demand for goods and services has decreased because of the price, and so the prices are coming down as a natural sort of effect. And so inflation is down, and year-on-year inflation is very clearly moving towards the Fed's 2% goal. We're sitting at 2.4% as of last night, which is well below both the consensus and the forecast of 2.6 and 2.5 respectively. So kind of a really big day, big couple of days for the market. And while that was sort of bullish, we haven't really seen the full effect of that come into play just yet. Even if we take a look at CME FedWatch, I think the probabilities of seeing a rate cut still aren't particularly high. They're sitting around 15-16%. And we're likely not going to see those probabilities really shift to the upside until that 2% goal is hit, or unless we see the job market in the US really take a aggressive hit, right? Like we saw all the way back in December when we had our first early rate cut. So with all that in mind and all the recent news that's come out, let's talk about how this has an effect on Bitcoin. So taking a look here on the short time frame, we can see clearly that rally from the tariff news wasn't really enough to shift these charts to being bullish. While we have seen some sort of like bullish development on the double bottom there, and we have printed a higher low right now, there isn't really a clear bullish structure that's developed here in Bitcoin, and particularly concerning is the inability to establish 81,000 as a base of support, right? So despite the push upwards, the selling pressure exhibited here is still much stronger than any buying pressure and accumulation behavior that we have that would push Bitcoin back up to, a bullish trajectory on the short time frame. And so while we continue to reject off $81,000, the more likely scenario on the short time frame is that we head back down to the range low at 74.5 thousand. One thing to note, however, is if we zoom in a little into the 1 hour chart and we take a look at our momentum, we can see that we are still traveling in an uptrend here, right? So when we had that double bottom formation, one of the really bullish things about it was we had bullish divergence as well, right? So we had these higher highs on the RSI showing us that selling pressure was decreasing as we approached 74,000 for the second time, and that uptrend has carried us throughout this entire move back upwards. So even though we've seen a correction back down to 78,000 here for Bitcoin, we're still above that uptrend. So currently the assumption is on the hourly chart is as long as we continue to travel in this short time frame uptrend, Bitcoin should have the potential to continue forming sort of higher highs on the price action, even though we're not seeing it just yet, and potentially flip these charts. And so the first target, the first thing we want to see is a flip of 81K to a base of support. And then, of course, the following levels of resistance. If you pull up the Smart Money Concepts indicator here on the hourly chart, you can see them very clearly. They're basically the prior highs in this downtrend, as well as the levels of significance in that previous horizontal range. So we have the base at 81, the midline resistance at 84,000, right? And then, of course, the range high resistance for the weekly horizontal range at 88.74. One last thing that also supports the significance of this 81K resistance here, or the base of that prior horizontal range, is if we pull up the market cipher A and take a look specifically at the 50 EMA, the dark blue trend line, and the 200 EMA, the red one, right? So typically when we see those two trend lines sort of converging and approaching that level as resistance, if we manage to flip both those as support instead, it should generally facilitate a leg back upwards. You can see here in those previous instances where we flip above support, we generally see another rally. Over here we lost it, went back down, once again, weren't able to sustain it as support, continued rejections, and so on and so forth, right? So if we're able to flip 81K, we would also do so for the 50 and 200 EMA. Now, if we zoom out into the daily time frame, we can really put into context just how interesting and important that recent short time frame rally for Bitcoin was by taking a look at the 2025 downtrend. So in my last video, really quickly, when we talked about the daily chart, what I noted was the RSI over here, right? So over here, after these last three lower lows on the price action, we had started to develop what could lead to a breakout of the 2025 downtrend, being these consistent instances of bullish divergence on the RSI, right? So between this low and this low on the RSI, we had a decrease in selling pressure, so higher lows, but a lower low on the price action, right? So that is bullish divergence, and that eventually led to a rally over here back up to 88,000 and a retest of the 2025 downtrend. Now in that instance, we weren't able to push above it, right? We ended up rejecting off the 50 EMA and above the top of our sort of short time frame horizontal range here, that top of that resistance, and went on to create this final rally down to descent down to 74.5 thousand. Now in this next lower low, we have once again created another instance of bullish divergence, a higher low on the RSI. Now facilitated by the tariff news and that 90-day pause and whatever rally that resulted in, we went back up in this bullish divergence case to retest once again the 2025 downtrend. Now, in this instance as well, it looks like once again we've seen a rejection, right? That most recent rejection from 83.5 thousand, that was also a retest and rejection of the 2025 downtrend. So it's further confirmation that while this rally was, pretty decent, we went up a fair amount within that 1 day candle, it wasn't enough to actually flip any charts to being bullish. On the short time frame, we failed to sustain 81,000 as a basis support. On the daily time frame, we failed to push above the 2025 downtrend. Despite this instance of bullish divergence, the decreasing selling pressure that we're experiencing across the last couple of months, or weeks. But while we haven't necessarily been able to flip the charts, we have seen some pretty promising developments on the high time frame, on the weekly chart. So we still need to break above the 2025 downtrend. So on the short time frame from this rally, if Bitcoin sustains that hourly chart RSI uptrend, we've managed to push above the 200 EMA and the 50 EMA on the hourly chart, push above 81K, establish that support, and continue laddering back upwards throughout this prior horizontal range, we might see an actual recovery for Bitcoin on the high time frame. And one of the reasons why that's so important is if we take a look at the weekly time frame, we can see that the recent rally was a little bit of a band-aid for what could have been a really, really bearish week for Bitcoin. So I say band-aid because it's not a long-term solution, right? We still have a couple of days to the close, and there's really no telling that Bitcoin's going to break above the 2025 downtrend, even though we've seen this band-aid, right? So it's not a real solution. But if we take a look at the Gaussian channel and the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame, we can see that the recent rally has actually pushed Bitcoin to sit back above the Gaussian channel and that 50 EMA. And that's really, really crucial because historically, those macro levels of support have been sort of bull-bear indicators where falling below both these levels, we tend to see a high time frame period of deaccumulation for Bitcoin. So 3 days left to the close. It is a band-aid, but there is some sort of really interesting developments, and I'm very, very curious to see how that's going to continue throughout the next 3 day period, whether or not that 1 hour uptrend is going to hold, and if we are going to see an actual bullish close, a bullish weekly close for Bitcoin at the end of the week, on Monday next week. Alrighty guys, that is a wrap on the analysis for today. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. If you enjoyed the video or you learned something, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel to get regular Bitcoin analysis every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. And join my free Telegram for more regular Bitcoin updates. If you're interested in my VIP trading channel, don't forget to message me down below on Telegram. VIP gives you exclusive access to my personal trading setups with exact entry points, targets, and stop losses. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!